Okay, thanks for arranging this very valuable opportunity for operators and flight planning vendors to work closely in ensuring the concept of TBO are addressed and a solution introduced that works for all the stakeholders. It's important to bear in mind that the goal of this and future sessions is not to educate the audience on the concept of FFICE, TBO and SWIM, but to focus on how the concepts can be brought to life. How we can introduce solutions that allows ever-changing TBOs for individual flights to be flown, and how the accurate and timely sharing of information allows the initial operator proposed flight trajectory to mutate throughout the full phase of flight to seize evolving opportunities and restrictions. So looking at the slide 3 here, just some background to it. IATA sees ICAO's development of these new concepts and technologies as an opportunity for ANSPs and operators to change the way airspace capacity and its use is managed in real time. This requires ANSPs, operators and flight planning system providers to radically change the way they do business. In order to ensure we are aligned moving forward, these sessions are to better understand each other's expectations and requirements. So today is for us operators to better understand how flight planning providers intend changing the way they do business in order to play their part in enabling dynamic real-time TBO. To start the ball rolling, we begin today by asking what will the benefits be and what will the impact be. So with that, we'd like to begin the first presentation, but before we do, apologies from Flight Keys. Due to last-minute unforeseen circumstances, they were unable to present today, but remain an important player in helping shape the future of this topic as we move forward. So good evening, I believe it is for you, Steve. Steve Altus from Boeing Jefferson. Would you go ahead with your presentation?
Yeah, thanks very much, Peter. I'd like to thank Tomo and IATA for giving me the opportunity to share our vision of what future operations will look like with FFICE and SWIM. One thing that Tomo asked me to do was to go into some detail on the differences between FFICE and FPL 2012. So I've come up with a list here in this table, and I believe this is available to you, will be if you don't already have it. But I'll go through these, and first I want to stress that FFICE is not just a data format or a message format. It defines a set of services and a set of related messages for each of those services, and the way, sort of the process, the procedure for information to be exchanged. And that's what drives a lot of the differences. So the first one we show here, in a lot of ANSPs, you file a flight plan and you'll get maybe a response that says, we understood your message, it was correctly formatted, but not any feedback about whether the route was okay. And it's not until you get a clearance from the airplane that you really know what route you'll be cleared for. And we believe that this is one of the main reasons that a lot of operators still fly fixed company routes rather than optimizing every flight, which would be advantageous. We also think that this leads to captains asking for a lot of unnecessary extra fuel, because if they expect that they may receive a different route than what is in their flight plan, they won't be sure what the fuel load they will need is, and so they will ask for additional fuel up front. So in FFICE, there's a feedback on every submission. Every message, you'll get a response saying, yes, that's the route we're going to give you, or that's the route we think we will give you, or no, your message was okay and we understood your message, but your route is not something we will give you. And then you can come to some understanding of what route you will get earlier in the process, in the planning stage, and so you'll know what route you will get. So we think that's an advantage. Another related advantage is that right now, even if you do get a response on the route, whether it's okay or not, you do not get constraints specific to this flight. So in FFICE, you'll get constraints 3 ways. Some constraints should be published before you even submit any request for your flight. But also whether your flight whether your route is okay and agreed, or whether you get a message saying your route is not okay. Either way, that should come with some constraints from the ANSP that would be relevant to the flight. And that way, rather than just finding some route that would meet the constraints, you can find a route that meets the constraints but also meets your business objectives. I like to say it's more operationally favorable. The next two are also related, and that right now you can't get any feedback before filing, and after you've filed, you can't get any feedback to a what if without committing to it. So in the pre-stage, the early stage in FFICE, you'll be able to send in your idea of which way you would like to fly without actually filing the plan, and get feedback about whether that is likely to be accepted if you file it. Similarly, in the current stage, you can make a change request after you file your plan, or you can cancel it and file a new one, but you can't usually say to the ANSP, here's something we would like to change and do differently, and get feedback without committing to that change. So there's a concept of a trial request, and we'll talk a little bit more about the planning service and the trial request after I'm through this list. The next two, or the next one actually, I said that the main difference is the services and not the data format, but the next one on this list really is about the data format. And that's that in the FPL 2012, there are limitations to the way the 4D path can be represented mostly in item 15. And that can lead to mismatches between what the flight planning system calculated and what the ANSP calculates for its trajectory. And we've shown that this leads to a lot of false rejections of flight plans when the operator believes they will be meeting the constraints, but the ANSP's calculation shows they will be missing constraints. And SESAR research in Europe has actually validated that exchanging this kind of trajectory information reduces false rejections of flight plans by a large percentage. So we're really excited about this improvement. And the last one thing we hear is well, gosh, FPL 2012 was a very small and simple change, and yet it was costly, time-consuming, and a lot of trouble for the industry to implement. And now you're talking about making this much bigger change to go to FFICE. How can you justify that? How will that work? And we really believe that that's one of the main drivers for switching to FFICE as well, because once we have FFICE in place, small changes of the type that were made to the FPL in 2012 are actually much easier to do. They can be rolled out more optionally. They're less time and less money to implement. So this is another big advantage of FFICE. So let's dig into the planning service. So the planning service is optional, but we're very much encouraging ANSPs to implement the planning service. We see a lot of benefit to it. What it lets you do is run your entire schedule for tomorrow today and get feedback from the ANSP. Now, a lot of airlines are doing this sort of thing already. They're doing it, some of them are doing it with their flight plans, but they do not get any feedback from the ANSP. But some airlines are also doing this kind of day before analysis or even several days before with their crew schedules and with their operations control schedule, with their tails, maybe with their maintenance and their passengers. And they're looking for issues that may come up. And it gets not only a more optimal solution, but a more robust solution, where instead of having problems occur and responding to them, you may be able to identify possible problems and change your plan the day before or several days before to actually avoid the problem in the first place. Now, what we see happening with the planning service is that you can put everything together into a big multidisciplinary analysis, where instead of thinking of flight planning as many single trajectory optimizations for aircraft, you can think of the entire airline as a logistics problem. And I show these pictures at the bottom of this page showing the different kinds of payload that you can carry, just to remind everyone that airlines are not really in the business of moving airplanes around. They're in the business of moving payload around. So once we have this capability to get feedback from the ASP on different routes, we can start optimizing the entire airline operation as a logistics problem 1 or more days in advance, and it will be more accurate because we're getting feedback. The other big advance that I'm really excited about is trial requests. So some airlines and some flight planning software already has the ability to monitor for any change that may cause a change in the flight plan, where you might be able to do something differently, fly a different route, fly different altitudes, fly different speeds. And you can have automation look for these events. So changes to payload, changes to the winds, changes to convective weather, changes to the condition of the aircraft, the equipage on the aircraft if you swap tails, something like that. And one of the issues is there are so many of these triggers that could make a change. And if you show every possible change to your staff, to your flight crew, or to your operations center staff, they can be overwhelmed evaluating a lot of changes. And maybe if you try to submit those changes and change the filed flight plan, it will not be accepted by the ANSP anyway. So what we see with the trial request is that automation at the airline will be constantly re-optimizing the plans subject to any changes to the input conditions. But before they show these to a person to review, they will submit a trial request, and automation at the ANSP can respond to the trial request and say, yes, if you filed that change, we would probably give you that route the way you've asked for it. And so now you only show a potential change to the flight crew or the operations center staff to review if you know it's likely to be accepted by the ANSP. And then if they approve it, then you can go ahead and file it. And we believe that most of the time when you file a plan that got a positive response in the trial request, you will also get it accepted when you make the filing change. I'm going to skip past this one. I know another big concern has been mixed mode. So we all know that when FFICE is introduced, it will be introduced in some countries, some regions, some ANSPs before others. And one question we get is, what kind of tools will you give to an airline to help them handle mixed mode? My response to this is we already have to handle mixed mode. There are actually regional variations to the FPL where either it's vaguely described in the Quad 4 doc, or some ANSPs are not completely compliant, or there are options allowed that are implemented differently. So we already have to manage that. We also already manage the difference between Europe and most of the rest of the world. Where in Europe, you can send a plan for validation before you file it. And also in Europe, you can use B2B services instead of the FPL for filing. So these have already built experience for us in mixed mode. Also in terms of SWIM rather than FFICE, we already are getting SWIM data from the FAA and from Eurocontrol and fusing that with legacy data sources from other ANSPs, other countries, other regions. And we don't necessarily tell the user, this is SWIM data here, and this is other data from another source. We put this all together and harmonize it so that the user just has one view of situational awareness. So we think we know already how to handle the mixed mode, and we illustrate how this will work down in the bottom, where the flight planning user on the left through their user interface, they're dealing with flight plan data that we are then figuring out how to send it in different formats to different ASPs, depending on what different versions of FFICE they're accepting, or if they're still accepting FPL 2012 only. Now there is one difference. We can make the technical portion of this mixed mode seamless to the user, but the workflow is going to vary. And so we're going to build into our UI some context-sensitive help to make sure that users understand the workflow variations, so they know when they submit a trial request where it's going and where it's not going, and what actions they need to have, and what certainty they have about a change to the flight plan based on that. Okay, I'll talk just briefly on SWIM. I've been talking about FFICE. One concern with SWIM is that there's just a huge amount of information, and some people are concerned that this might overwhelm the users. And it is true that the growth in information is exponential. So we're focused very much on not just giving the information directly to users, but to selecting it, curating it, filtering it, and getting them what information they need in the right context so that they can get comprehension, in other words, understanding what's going on from that information and what they need to know. And then what we call projection, which is understanding what the future system state will be based on all the information that's coming out right now. One note I want to make is just, again, a reminder, if your airline is focused on delivering payload, one argument against using all this real-time swim information in the past has been that if you on real time make changes to how you're going to operate, it's hard to get the information out to all the people who need to act on it, who I list here. And this situation has really changed in the last several years because of mobile device adoption. So right now, if you change what you're going to do, if you decide based on swim data and projection of future system state, for example, to switch one flight from one aircraft to another, you need to get the passengers to another gate. They mostly have apps on their personal phones, so it's easier and more reliable to get that news out to them. Pilots and cabin crew know what they need to do because they typically are carrying devices now. And for ground crew, we think it's going to be all wearables, but at the very least, they're going to have devices with them so we can figure out what different things they need to do. So this is an illustration of how we see this all working. So we're going to take swim data, all this real-time data and information, and we're going to fuse it with historical data that we've stored and with internal airline information that we control and have access to, and we're going to perform real-time analytics on that to predict the system state over the next, say, 0 to 30 hours. And from that, we're going to use decision support, and we're going to use optimization based on that predicted system state to help you make better operational decisions. So we'll send those decisions out via mobile devices to all the airline actors and maybe the passengers, but we also go back to swim and send our intended changes to operations so they can be shared with other actors in the ATM system. Just to give you our status real briefly, swim is definitely already in use in our products, our services, and I say both directly and indirectly, because directly, some of the data that's important for users, we're selecting and passing straight through to users. But indirectly, we're building real-time services for optimization and decision support and situational awareness based on the swim information. We've also been working with the FAA on validation exercises of FFICE, helping to establish the data formats, the connectivity, the information flows, and give feedback to ICAO. And in terms of Europe, who's the other early adopter and implementer of FFICE, we've been working together with them in their flight plan filing and data evolution task force. We're monitoring their maturity. We're looking at the FFICE release timetable and deciding when exactly we're going to come in and implement with this, probably in FFICE 4.2, which is scheduled out in the first quarter of next year. So that's all I have, and I think the questions will come at the end when all the presentations are done.
That's correct, Steve. Yeah, we'll leave questions till the end. I think what we're all aligned with here with some of the things you've talked about is reacting to continuous changes and the necessity for two-way communication being the priority for making this all work. And it's comforting to hear you talk about your experience with mixed mode because that's something that is a worry for operators, how we're actually going to manage that. But I'm sure we'll have plenty of questions after the presentations with regard to that. So thanks, Steve. Next, moving on to Eckhard Pfannenstiel. Good morning, Eckhard. Eckhard is presenting on behalf of Lufthansa Systems.
Good morning. So I hope you can see my screen. Welcome everybody to today's webinar, and thank you very much for giving us a chance to participate in these webinars to show our picture of future airline operations. First of all, my name is Eckhard Pfannenstiel. I'm a business analyst working for Lido Flight and currently mainly responsible for implementing the first FFICE services which are available in Europe, provided by the network manager. So when we talk about the future snapshot of future operations, airline operations, first of all, I would like to mention our own vision, how the future would look like and how they will look like using Lido tools, but I will not go in that in detail. I'm just mentioning that because it's also touching very much questions like how to handle a flight from pre-flight, in-flight, and even post-flight, and having real-time optimizations, real-time changes, and how to handle that. But for today, we focus very much, or I will focus very much now on these processes or these ideas of SWIM, FFICE, and TBO. And here I will especially focus very much on that what is available already, because I said, yes, I'm responsible now for implementing the first services. So the first services are available. So the first services can be used. And I would like to point some topics, what will be the impact of implementing these, using those, and so on. But first of all, when we want to have a general statement about the future operations, airline operations, one thing which is very clear is it will be much more integrated, and this from a system and a process perspective. You know, you have today a lot of different solutions, and also other actors in the game have different solutions, and they are only lightly connected, but the integration will be much more deeper in the future. And this is one reason for that is because we will have all much more information, and the information itself will have much more details. So all actors will have a much better picture of the situation, and this gives a lot of opportunities to use this information to optimize the process, to optimize the flight planning itself, to optimize the operation itself. Where does this information come from? It comes from SWIM, because SWIM, the idea of SWIM is to provide commonly understood quality information to the right people at the right time. And it's not only to the right people, it's mentioned also to the right systems in that context. So SWIM is really an enabler for improved operational processes. SWIM is an enabler for processes like FFICE. So SWIM is the basis for that. And SWIM delivers a lot of technical benefits which can be used for these processes. But also SWIM itself has already impacts on airline processes. But how to achieve maximum benefit using SWIM, and this can only be done in case all systems are connected to SWIM, because only when a system is connected to SWIM, it can deliver benefit to SWIM and it can receive benefits from SWIM. So in case we speak of the integrated airline processes, we must speak of a full process integration of all the systems in the ops context. But having achieved such an integration will bring a maximum of process optimization. But I said before, why does SWIM itself, or I said SWIM itself brings also changes to the processes itself? Because one fundamental difference in SWIM compared to today's business is when you connect to SWIM, it means that you or the system will always receive an answer to a request. First of all, it does not seem to be such a big change, but it means that all connected systems need to handle these requests and responses, and it means that a workflow can't go on without having the response received. So receiving answers for all requests impacts all the processes when being connected to SWIM. This means it creates a high dependency for all actors, because all actors need also to wait for the responses. You can't work in a fire and forget context anymore. This brings a lot of benefits. So I like the comparison presented by Steve before between ICAO 2012 and a FFICE flight plan. Then you saw in that you will have a lot of benefits receiving answers, but it's also a fundamental change to the processes itself. Another thing in SWIM is that the formats are now developed for machine-to-machine communication. That's also a basic change when working with SWIM compared to today's business. Today, formats are human readable. When you think about a flight plan, then this is a human readable format. Human can write it, human can read it, and so on. In SWIM, this will not be the case anymore. Here in the background, you can see a flight plan, and this is only a part of it. It's an EFPL, it's a flight plan using a FFICE, and it's much longer than that what you see in the background. And yes, it's possible to read it as a human, but normally that's nothing which shall be presented to a human. So using these formats, which are developed for machine-to-machine communication, it requires that it need to be evaluated from a system, user, and process perspective, how to handle them. And in this example here now, for example, what to display to a user as an FPL, and when we use such an EFPL with a FFICE format. So what exactly shall be displayed? Is it required to display it at all? And if yes, what part of this? And these are questions we need to answer, and that's something we are working together on with our customers to discuss what shall be displayed, what would you like to see here, how would you like to work with it? And that's beside of all the automatic handling which provides the system anyhow. Moving forward to FFICE, also the FFICE concept, the process flows for FFICE are fundamentally different from ICAO 2012. And first of all, it's because we exchange now 4D trajectories in the FFICE context. That's logical, that's a goal, because we want to have a flight plan to be exchanged, which includes much more details than in ICAO 2012, because the goal is to have a format which gives less room for interpretation. As also Steve already pointed out before, it quite often leads to a situation where you need to discuss whether such an ICAO 2012 flight plan using an ITN 15 route string can be accepted as it is, just because of different interpretation of the route. This is not the case anymore when you exchange EFPLs, because this is a very exact representation of the route itself, together with much more information, together with, for example, expected weather information and so on. But another difference in the FFICE concept compared to ICAO 2012 is that it is required that every EFPL-enabled air navigation service provider need to be addressed separately. So it's not possible anymore that you just send the flight plan only, for example, to the departure station, and when it is accepted there, or even you do not receive a response, you're obliged to operate. Now, within FFI's context, you have to address every separately. But this means also every air navigation service provider can reply with you. You will always receive a reply, but can reply. It's not a must, but can reply with an adjusted trajectory. And this leads to the big question how to negotiate trajectories, because here you can have replies with different adjusted trajectories which did not fit together. It's an extreme example, but it's possible, and it's a question how to handle that. As I said, we are implementing already the first services, so this should give you a little bit an overview about the timeline, because the first services are available already in Europe since the beginning of this year. When we talk about the first services available in Europe, these are flight filing services, including a trial service and things like that. So it's possible in Europe already to file a flight plan as an EFPL using the FFICE format. As far as we know, nobody is doing that so far, because we are together in a close cooperation with the network manager to evaluate how this can work in details. So, for example, at the moment we discuss details about the exchange content. When we talk about FFICE, this is about processes, and when we talk about EFPL, this uses FFICE as a format. But this gives a lot of definitions, but also a lot of room still of variations how to do it. And this is something which need to discuss with every provider and need to evaluate it how this shall be done in detail. So it's not when moving to FFICE, when moving to new processes, it's just not only a switch on and go on. It's a longer process where we all have to learn together how this should work and how this can be done. And that's what we do at the moment together with the network manager in Europe, because they are the first to provide these services. And we do that because we believe it's really a value to start with that, to learn how it can work and to use it, to use such an EFPL in a live scenario. So the service of Lido Flight will be enabled or will be released end of this year, which is quite soon. But still, as I said, we are in discussions with NM about details. So another question is when really to use that in a real life ops context. And maybe also a few words about mixed mode, because this is always a topic coming up in that context. And also we do not see this as a critical thing. We already manage that today, and we will also manage this here. And this has been already implemented, how to manage that. It's later on more a question about negotiating trajectories and so on. But as FFICE at the moment is at a stage where we talk mainly about pre-flight processes, it's not such a big topic. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for listening, and I think we will have questions afterwards.
Many thanks, Eckhard, for your presentation. You touched on a number of subjects that have been concerns and discussions also with operators and IATA. Working in real time, the need for machine-to-machine communication, and the setup of standard processes that we all follow in that we send out a message and we wait for a response to that. Another concern that has been raised previously is the need to address flight plans to each ANSP individually. That I'm sure will be a big topic of conversation moving forward, but we're pleased to see that you've also touched on that as being a concern. So no doubt there will be questions regarding that. So thank you, Eckhard. Moving on lastly to Dave Whitehead, who's presenting for Sabre. Not sure where you are, Dave, so either a good morning or a good evening to you.
Hi, good. I'm in Vienna, so it's a good morning to me. So to the audience, a good time of day wherever you are. So first of all, I'd like to thank IATA for the opportunity to make the presentation, and thank you also to the co-presenters for sharing their valuable insight. And I hope at the end of this, the various presentations will give all the attendees much greater knowledge, awareness, and hopefully some excitement about the future. Challenges as well, obviously, along the way, and so I hope you all get some benefit from it. So I work with Sabre Systems, similar to Eckhart and Lido. We're also in close collaboration with the Eurocontrol Network Manager in our path forwards. So my first slide, just on the Sabre flight planning products. The reason I've just listed these here are the different solutions in flight planning, flight following, communications, and in the flight deck. Obviously, with these developments, communication between all the business stakeholders is essential, so therefore connectivity between the systems is also required. So I want to talk first of all about the future. So what and why? So SWIM, as I'm sure you are aware after the previous good presentations, it is the enabler for transition from legacy data to business exchange, business data exchange, and that provides a whole lot more data with more immediacy than the legacy methods did. So immediate availability of data and message exchange, so that's data in both directions. It allows greater automation, particularly in terms of the creation and adjustment of the trajectory, greater granularity of the detail, and increased accuracy between the airline and the ANSP. And also reduction in cost. There is a big cost associated with legacy telex-based data exchange. And the reason why, or some of the drivers as to why, is global demand for more capacity in the skies. And more capacity means that more granularity in trajectory availability is required. Obviously, reduction in operating costs, that's a factor for everybody. Reduction in flight delays provides better availability of the aeroplanes and schedule maintenance. Fuel usage obviously is always significant across a large aircraft fleet, and also in the current environment, reduction of fuel usage obviously reduces carbon emissions as well on a flight-by-flight basis. So the benefits for the industry. So increases in airspace capacity, better utilisation of airspace within and across airspace boundaries lead to a reduction also in flight delays. Operational efficiency is also driven by availability of a fully optimised route and trajectory, again hitting on the key factors of reduced fuel burn and emissions. It drives improvements in safety because the both parties in any flight, the ANSP and the flight crew, have better situational awareness of the environment, and also for the ANSP, significantly improved knowledge of where the aeroplane is going to be in the four-dimensional sense. And as I previously mentioned, reduced cost. So across business, system developers and airlines as well are required to create new interfaces and new business logic, data processing and storage without impacting system performance to give greater access to data across the business. Excuse me. So, FFICE, so flight plan submission versus legacy versus FFICE. So as you all know, the legacy ICAO 2012 flight plan provides a basic plan for a flight, contains routing, speed, altitude, airports, aircraft details, etc. And also cost and outdated method of transmission. Data exchange isn't immediate, so a flight plan is filed. The operator then becomes aware that the flight plan is in the system after a period of time. FFICE provides for more data to be shared, particularly data, the trajectory in a four-dimensional format, so that places the aeroplane at a point in space with the time consideration too, so it's fully four-dimensional. Greater detail on aircraft performance and also aircraft limitations. And the result is collaborative flight planning between the ANSP and the airline operator, and that derives certainty in the fuel decision and again, it increases business confidence in the actual trajectory of the flight will ultimately be achieved. The benefits for the ANSP is to get a full, true four-dimensional trajectory for all parts of any flight, and that includes this climb, descent, and any en route climb and descent points too. So again, trajectory-based operations to plan a flight on using TVO. So FFICE is an enabler for trajectory-based operations. It provides an opportunity for a fully optimized pre-route trajectory for every flight. Factors aircraft capability. Use ETOPS as an example, but aircraft capability impacts the trajectory of the flight regardless of aircraft design and specification, or whether the aircraft is carrying an MEL, which may restrict some of its capability. Also enables factoring of airspace capability, i.e. Restricted airspace or any other state or regulatory considerations. And also dynamic airspace capability, so that's the ability to dynamically adjust the trajectory during the flight through re-optimization and resubmission. Also evolving airspace design, so FFICE will enable airspace design to be improved and with a lot more ability then to direct track between points or areas. And lastly, other environmental business needs to manage routings. Weather avoidance is there, but a lot of businesses have their own particular business needs, which also have to be managed. So the result is a truly optimised trajectory flight plan, fit for the mission at the best cost and duration. So the greater picture with B2B, again as part of SWIM, is enables provision of fixed airspace data, the provision of variable airspace data, provision of weather data, and as discussed, 4-dimensional flight planning. So this provides immediacy of accurate and timely data, and also the data is much more detailed than legacy systems have enabled. So the data consumers, ANSPs or the airlines, then have access to true real-time data for the first time, and also enables data transfer to be immediate and streamlined. So the future and system usage and business usage. So SWIM brings greater availability of data to the airline and the ANSP. For the airline, importantly, it will allow greater collaboration between business units in an airline to utilise the data and enable the best business decision to be made for every mission. Provides for better visibility of data. So, for example, visibility of hotspots such as congested airspace or closed airspace with greater granularity, and the data is available immediately. And that is also of value to multiple business areas within any operation. And the data will inform cross-business decision making. So, and also situational awareness for every mission. And when I talk about every mission, that is both operating and also planned or scheduled. So integration should be available to all users across multiple platforms. So that goes beyond individual vendor. Many airlines use different platforms for different purposes, and these need to be integrated. So I guess you can see in terms of the user has a lot more visibility now and a lot more control to provide the business the best decision. I also wanted to talk about risk. So change comes with risk. So the move from legacy to SWIM will be a global change, but it won't be an immediate global change. It will be staged over a period of time. So systems need to maintain capability to maintain both legacy and new methods together until transition is concluded. So we have to be able to communicate in both legacy and SWIM methodology. And these have to be concurrently for the duration of the transition. A lot of aircraft missions across many regions of the globe in a single flight. This may lead to misaligned data. So the data-heavy AXM or SWIM data transfer will contain a lot more data than the legacy data. So again, as I'm highlighting this as a risk that needs to be managed. Importantly, data standards across the globe must be met to a standard level. For example, we're all aware there's differences in NOTAM standards between different areas. This provides an opportunity to raise the bar and maintain a standard in data content. And lastly, it would be difficult to integrate a single platform with varying standards of data. As mentioned earlier, the global reach of aviation makes it essential that that is maintained to a high standard. And that concludes my presentation. So I want to thank everybody again for listening, and I'll hand back to Anna. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave. It's good to see that we're all aligned in the ultimate goal, and that's better utilization of the airspace globally. And also pleased to see that you spoke of accurate and timely data. Yes, it's essential, but experience tells us that it's going to be a challenge, to say the least. And when you mention risks at the end, this is got to stay very high up on the list of priorities, and work done to ensure that that is realized. So thank you all for your insightful thoughts today. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk to the three of you together and to hear your thoughts and plans.